Wham bam. We're live. I think. Let's give it a sec. I'll also screen share in VC. I'll just screen share my whole screen so I can share refs and stuff. People on YouTube, just let me know if the volume's okay and everything. Sometimes I feel like I should speak louder. I don't want to like yell down my mic, but I get a lot of comments from people telling me that I'm doing some kind of odd ASMR whispering, so I can yell. Talk a regular volume.
It sounds fine on stream, so it should be alright.
Excellent. Okay, well you're up first anyway, so let's grab yours.
I can resend in the reference as well if you want.
No, I've got 'em. Let's just hope that we can copy paste it over. Yes, we can. Okay. So, you're just studying the image. Got no particular goal with it other than studying the image, is that right?
Yeah, it was me just studying the image, and then I was using only like hard solid round, and then I used a little bit of airbrush for the face.
When you were using the hard round, what was your goal with that? Were you doing it as like a challenge, or is it just that you wanted to try out a different brush, or?
It's a little bit of a challenge, and I saw someone's art a little while ago, and they only used the hard solid round for like everything.
Mm-hmm.
I just like the way that like the edges on like some of the shapes that they could get with just the hard solid round looked. I'll see if I can find their drawing and I'll put it in chat
Right,
later.
you like the way it looks. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. I think you've done a reasonably okay job. I mean, the thing that immediately stands out to me is that you're not using the background at all. So the reason that I feel like this looks kind of low contrast when it shouldn't, compared with this, is because this has a bright white background that the character is silhouetted on. So
Yeah.
I always like to think whether I'm doing a landscape or a character or anything, that the background is just as important as the character, right? As the context on which the character sits, and it's going to change how your values appear, how everything appears, really. So I'd get that in. I like to think when I'm studying that the image I'm looking at, I'm almost painting it as though I'm viewing it through a blurred or unfocused camera. And so I might not get detail and like small bits of information right away, but I do want to get big relationships between value and color right away, and one of those is going to be between your subject and the background that they're sat on, right? So we could do that. We could even get the sort of gradient in that's happening. Maybe we just sample this like that. So that's a big change. It's unfinished at the moment. Is there a reason why you didn't tackle a lot of the sort of stuff going on? Did you just run out of time, or?
Yeah, it was so I only really had 45 minutes on my break, so I was just doing this on my break, and then when I finished, that's like all I really got time to do. I did want to like go back to it and like try and do the mask, but I've just not really had time yet at the moment.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so that's I guess the thing that I want to talk about here is the efficiency with which you're making some of these decisions. There's a lot of stuff going on that's kind of like, let's look at the shoulder, for example. Let's just take this. Take yours. And then we'll paint another one, and we'll paint it really small so that we can't get het up in big decisions. So there are these two side by side. And immediately I think you can notice some differences between them. Right, one of those differences is that generally this is darker all over. Not only is it darker all over, but most of this strap is the same level of darkness, right? So all of that goes darker. And there's a part of the strap that is more reflective down here. So how would we approach that? Let's have a think. I think I'm gonna get the general just shape of this blob, and maybe we will literally think about it as a screen grab. And in fact, this whole area can probably go that dark to begin with, can't it? Then we probably want to get this shape right. Well, that's close enough. Right, and if I'm being very economical with my brushstrokes and my values, what do you think the next most important shape I can get in is?
Probably the big like square, slightly lighter one.
This.
Yeah, like that one.
Yeah. So, are you using any sort of lasso selections or anything when you're painting this?
Not on this one. No, this was just like on the iPad, so it's just pretty much just all.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I might use a lasso selection, so I think I'm going to grab a lasso selection like that, and I'm going to invert it so I'm painting outside of it. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to raise my value up a little bit here. It's probably too high. I'm going to do something like that. And then maybe over here it fades in a bit softer to the rest of it. And I think that is one sort of shape decision that I can start to expand upon. But it's a really simple shape decision. So if I now want to take the edge of that, and I want to push it up and over the arm like it's happening here, then I can. But it's still very, very simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you're just getting... This is too contrasty. You've got this value and this value. But really this is mostly just flat. So I think try and leave things as flat as you can, where you can. Maybe another place where this light can end up is up here on the shoulder. Where again it's a little bit reflective, but that reflection fades off. Let's go a bit lighter to get some of these individually more reflective bits. But even those, you've sort of, and I know it's going to sound very nitpicky, but when you're studying the form of something, you sort of do want to be a bit more nitpicky.
Yeah.
So here, all of your lines run parallel to each other as they go around the shoulder, something like that. They do angle in a little bit. And over here, let's just think about them on the reference. Almost immediately, they begin to gather and get a lot more dense, right? The angle of them changes, which sort of implies that they're turning around a form a bit more, right? So that is something that you don't even need to paint the thing to understand. You could draw it, just look at it, and understand that the relationship between these lines is conveying something about the 3D nature of the shoulder. Something really interesting, something really cool. I think it's cool anyway. And this it's almost like you're going, well, there's a pattern there, and so you're putting a pattern down, but you're not actually looking at which pattern is going on and the effect that it has on the image, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just thinking a little bit more about that, and maybe we just begin to put put those in close together. And playing around with them, changing shape. And then again, we can just grab this darker value and soften one of the edges. The last thing I think we probably need to do for this area, so just blocking that, is you are right, there are darker elements. So let's just see how simple we can get with them. First of all, I don't think we're going to have to go that dark. Let's do this. But I'm always going to want to eat back into these shapes, because the last thing I think I want to do is leave something looking like it was produced by the hard round. You can do that. I've seen people do that fairly successfully, but it has to be a very confident decision, right? So either you make it really obvious and you go, right, this is a painting using the hard round, and you go, bam, that's a big hard round shape. Or you cut back into it and you make it feel a bit more like a shape that's been designed. And I feel like here maybe you're not doing either, so especially here, that feels like a hard round shape, but it's not a big enough or a confident enough hard round shape that you're making a statement about it, like Craig Mullins or Li Shinyin might be doing when they use a hard round brush. So I just think about the shape that you're making, but the main problem here is like a value contrast and just how simple you can get. Now obviously once it's that simple, you're right, there are a lot more sort of subtle little things going on, so we could lower the opacity of our brush, and we could start building this up, and we could say, oh, there are a few more creases, right? But we're playing around inside of those groups that we've just made, rather than adding even more groups, if that makes sense. So, big picture thinking, big relationships between values and shapes, and then we can go in and we can get something smaller, whereas this to me looks like you've gone pretty small to begin with some of these things that are going on. So just think about simplifying them. Do you remember the exercise that I taught you in the Mastering Studio to Concept module, where you take a master study and you try and do it in like 10 brush strokes or whatever? Oh yeah. Yeah, that is such a good exercise. It's a really difficult exercise, it's a really annoying exercise, but it's very, very valuable, because you all of a sudden you begin to, you're sort of forced to realize what brush strokes you're putting down that are actually serving some kind of function, and which brush strokes are just there to make the image look kind of fancy or pretty. So I think I'm sharing my whole screen, aren't I? Yeah. Yes. Where are they? Let's have a gander. Here they are. So the idea is you take a master painting and you try and represent it in 10 brush strokes, or 10 decisions, because I don't really know how to quantify a brush stroke. And you can see here that means that maybe I'm forced to just forget about like the blue of the cushion. Is it that important? Maybe it is. Maybe in another one I'll have to try and use the blue of the cushion more. You know, I don't really need the little bits of information about every single fold on this. I just need the idea that it's a shape that gradates upwards, that's silhouetted on top of another shape, right? I mean, that one's getting pretty abstract, but I think we work in the abstract, and it's important to relate things back to the abstract when we can. So that is the main takeaway, and I think you can take this little tiny square and I think you can apply it to the rest of the painting. So generally the contrast issues are happening all over. You're simultaneously going too light compared with this, and I think too high contrast. Yeah. Almost not in the right places. There are areas of high contrast, but then when you get something like this pin down here, you're not actually going light enough. So it's like you're putting too much contrast in where you don't need it, and then when you do actually need that little punch of bright contrast, you're not putting it in.
Hmm.
That's okay. Again, like, just think about, is that doing anything? All of these little lines, are they serving any kind of function when you're painting?
Not really. It's more just for just on top of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, the decisions that you're making, they should have some kind of value attributed to them, I think.
Hmm.
Even if you were doing this for like a decorational or an artistic purpose, like you were saying, well, they don't really serve a function, but they do look cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's a decision you could make, but you would be doing them deliberately to look cool. And I don't know
Yeah.
if this is for them to look cool, or if it's just because you were sort of filling it in.
It was, yeah. It was sort of just to like, if the reference is there, like there was like a slight increase in contrast on that like center part, and then I was just like trying to make it look like a bit more of a gradient without just really just like going overly complex with it.
Yeah, I think
But
there's such an easier way to do this. In fact, let's just. So I've pressed Q, and that's going to let me paint a mask in. So if I just paint roughly where this highlight is, just as a solid shape, and then I press Q again, I get it as a selection. And then I genuinely think that the most elegant solution would be
yeah.
And then you could work back into it. You could say, well, there's another thing happening here. Right, there's actually almost like a, down here there's like a ridge to it, and then there's a highlight on top of that ridge, and you can play around with all that. But yeah, I think simple is going to be best, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And then you've got stuff like these chains. How do you come up with a way to simplify those chains? Well, is my... I think my pressure sensitivity is dead, but that's okay, we don't need it. So how might I simplify these chains? Well, with a hard round brush you could just, imply that there's some kind of texture there. You could go in the brush settings and increase the spacing on the hard round brush. Right, and all of a sudden you've got like some kind of texture. It's still the hard round brush, but it's got some kind of visual interest that says maybe there are links there. It's not exactly the chains that are actually there, but you're at least implying that there's some kind of change in material compared with like the cloth. So I think that could be fun. Is there anything else in the image that you want feedback on that you think I'm missing or I haven't spoken about?
I did mess around with the edges, like a little bit more, like cutting into shapes. I think, like in certain areas, but I think I just probably missed it in others. Is it like worth doing it throughout the entire image, or does it have does it not really matter too much?
Well, it just depends what you want to get out of it. I mean, it might be that you just want to try out a couple of funky edges in a very specific place, and you're just using this as a sort of test image to try that. If you're trying to understand how edges relate to each other, then having a complete set of images of edges throughout the painting might be more helpful, so you can view it as a whole. But that's really just up to what you want to get out of it. I know what you mean, because like here you've got these very soft edges going on with this highlight, which is really interesting. But then like up here you're using perfectly hard edges when it's a really soft edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just that internal consistency. If you're trying to represent a soft edge, then use a soft edge. You've done it here, but not up here. That seems like a weird decision. Or you could say, no, I'm going to challenge myself to do a painting with just hard edges, and that'd be fine. But then you got to use those hard edges everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And then maybe this up here, still simple, but maybe it just becomes a strip of light rather than something with a nice soft gradient on it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
All good.
Let's have a look at who's next. I think it's you, Faye. So let's bring this in. Let's collapse this down. So this character is meant to be this, and it's meant to be in this style, which is fine. Let's have a little read of what else you've written about it. You're trying to replicate the art style of Arcane, but you had quite a bit of trouble. You feel like the hair in the back doesn't match the rest of the artwork at all. Do you have any tips on getting art styles right? I think one big thing with getting art styles right is just let's not do any painting. Let's just make a list of observations about this that we could speak about, and we could clarify those into the same sort of 4 sections that I would probably tell you to think about studying in. So, drawing, value, edges, and color. Like, what can we say about the drawing of Arcane? I've not watched it. I do not play League of Legends, so I know absolutely zilch about it. But I could say that the shapes are simplified. I could say that pretty confidently. Is like these shapes are simplified. Okay, well they're not just simplified. They're simplified in a specific way. They're simplified in a pretty sharp, angular way. So let's take drawing and say it's angular. It's angular and it's simple. It is simple. It's much more simple than reality. Right, let's compare that to what you've done. And immediately, talking about the hair that you're thinking about, you've aligned yourself much closer to this reference than you have to the style that you're trying to match, right? So this reference, is this also one of your drawings or is this someone else's art? It's still your drawing. So the way you've drawn this is tons of little shapes coming off each other, and it's getting really complex. It's quite nice, but compare it with this, where like this character's hair is made up of what, 5 or 6 big chunks. The only area where it's getting even slightly complicated is here, where there are like 3 strands coming off, and here where there are another 2 strands coming off. Every other thing is like a big chunky shape, which based on the League of Legends art I have seen makes perfect sense. So like that silhouette is really simple and it's really angular, big clumps. This in comparison is not. So let's just do this half of the hair. So again, I'm just masking this out. Right, so this side of the head is in shadow, the whole of the hat's in shadow, which means back here, all of this hair is going to be in shadow, right? You're kind of almost emulating the lighting that's going on here. And notice that, like, the primary form of the head is respected, so light is hitting this right side, and it's turning away from the light into shadow. you're not getting like a weirdly bright highlight appear all the way back here because there's no light that's going to get there. So let's try and do something similar. Let's take one of your darker values and let's just play around with, here we go, a bit brighter, like a big chunky shapes. So we could do something like that. And then we can work into those chunky shapes. So maybe we take one of these and we can go a little bit lighter. And maybe at the border of it we go a little bit darker to say that it's like layered on top of itself. Do the same thing here. We could go a little bit darker. But we're still sort of respecting those big chunks of hair. Maybe, just maybe, some of this light is sneaking over the top. Let's turn the opacity down. But it's big shapes that we're playing with, big form changes. I think even the hat, right, we could apply the same kind of sentiment. Let's just look at the hat and let's respect that big form change. Yes, the folds are going to interact with it, but at the moment I think a lot of your folds are kind of breaking it. So let's flatten it out and just say one side's in light, one side's in shadow. Now where are all those folds going to appear? Well, let's have a look at the hair. Should change colour really. Okay, so the shadow side of the hair, which we'll say is from here to here, is really low opacity. It's quite flat. Not low opacity, low contrast. It's quite flat. The light side of the hair is quite flat. All of the information that tells you that there are folds going over each other, all of this contrast and interest is in the area between light and shadow, is where light and shadow transition between each other, okay? So, let's do the same thing here. I don't think on the lit side you're going to get these from the center. And then, yeah, maybe as the head turns this way, you get a couple more, but they're not going to be anywhere near as high contrast. It's part of this big simplification process. It's not even really a hat, is it? It's like a bandana. I even think here, here I think you were doing a better job, like this shape. It's got 3 edges to it, the front of it. I think here you're getting really kind of convoluted, where it's going over and up and over and down and down and up and down. Whereas, look at how simple these shapes are. They could have really complicated the shape where the coat is meeting the collar, but they haven't. They've left it nice and angular and simple. The collar itself is nice and simple. The hair going over the face is nice and simple. So let's just... maybe we have it come up on one side and then go down and round on the other side. Yeah, I think you're thinking that Arcane is more complex, which it kind of is. Again, I've not watched it, so I'm just going off this one screenshot. But I think Arcane is probably complex in terms of its rendering more than it's complex in terms of its shape. Seems to me that a lot of the shape is nice and simple. So can we simplify that? Yeah, I think we can. Okay, let's think about the skin. And the eyes. I think, just again, a lot of this can be simplified. I'm seeing so many teeny weeny little brushstrokes going on. Like this eyebrow has all these different shapes. And what you're going to find is that there's a little bit of hair there. Generally, there is this quite nice, sharp, overarching shape on top of everything else. Same with the shadow. Look at how graphic the shadow is under the nose. It's just this one shape. It's one value. One shape, one value. The shadow under your nose is one shape feeding into another shape, but it's got like, that's 1, 2, 3 values going on. Can we simplify it? Let's start with the eyebrow. I just think so much of this is just about making appealing shapes. I wish my Wacom settings worked. That'd be very, very helpful. There we go. I don't really know why that shape's there. Okay. Sure. That's a nice simple shape. We could get it to be a little bit more bushy if we wanted. And then all of this shadow under here, can that just be one shape? And maybe it does get darker here, but can it get darker in a cleaner, softer way? Shadow under the nose. Let's do an arcane. Let's just say all of that is one shape. Where else do they use that shadow? It's the same color as the shadow under the eyes. So maybe we do that. But then your shadow's going into another shadow, which is tricky because it kind of... I think we've got to brighten this up a little bit. I like how simple you've handled a lot of this. I think the shadow under the lip is maybe getting a little bit dark and a little bit muddy. But it also just depends on exactly what the geometry of this face is like. So the shadow under the eyebrow is really dark here because the character's looking very grumpy and they've furrowed their brow, so it's coming down in front of the eyes, and there's a nice sharp shadow. Also because it's a nice bright sun or light source or whatever it is. So it's a nice high contrast thing. Your character, they're also furrowing their brow. This image here would suggest that they don't really have a very heavy brow line. It seems to me that maybe they've got a much brighter, not brighter, a much lighter head. Yes, thank you very much. Apparently the stream has been on the starting soon screen for the past half an hour, which is amazing. Yeah, it seems like your character has a much brighter sort of brow ridge, or lighter brow ridge. And so maybe it won't even get that dark at all. You know, maybe it's actually going to pick up light here. So we can just consider how the form is going to relate to the rest of the image. Let's bring some of that light back up as well. Do you see how lightening up this area makes that brow feel like it's less heavy? One thing I feel like the arcane stuff does really well is these highlights, these specular highlights that are put in very, very tactically in the right places. I can see you're kind of trying to do that, but I just feel like you're not going far enough with it. So let's get these highlights in and let's make sure that they stay pretty sharp. So you're going to get something there. Probably going to get something under the bottom lip or where the corner of the mouth is. You're right, there's one in here. Let's sharpen it up. Maybe we put a darker colour next to it just to make it feel even sharper. Are we going to get one in the corner of the nose? Maybe. Those are nice sharp highlights though. So we've done drawing. Value, I think you're doing alright. You've got these sort of soft values going on. And you're not overcomplicating the face. You're not doing that big mistake I see everyone do where they go, oh, actually, there's these values in here, and there's about 1 million values under the eye. No, you're keeping it nice and simple with big plane changes, which I think is good. Maybe those plane changes could get sharper or softer in areas, so just look at these cheekbones. You're getting this really neat thing happen where closer to the cheekbone the shadow is much sharper. It's almost like a hard edge, and then as it descends down is the rest of the face. You know, there's more of a soft gradation outwards. So most edges, especially of shadows and things, are going to have that quality to them. So let's see what we could do. In fact, maybe we just make everything lighter. And then we bring this shadow down. And it starts nice and crisp. And then as it goes down here, it can get softer. And then less soft. And then not soft at all. So it's that sort of sliding scale of this is a, how else can we think about it? My brain's a little bit fried, so you'll have to excuse me. Just thinking about the topology of it, like this is a harsher corner, right? And as this is coming around, it's becoming softer. And then maybe it becomes something quite harsh again. Right. So it relates to a description of 3D form, and that's important. So whatever you're doing, any decision you're making, is probably going to relate back to a 3D form, right? The drawing is describing a 3D form in a 3D space, but it's represented with 2D shapes. The values and the changes in values are describing how a 3D form is turning away to or towards light, away from or towards light. The edges is what we've just spoken about with something like that, which is really interesting. And then the color is very much related to the value. Now, interestingly, this first ref is just flat shaded. You've definitely got more sort of blue than purple with this. I really like the blue that you had on your original. So how about we just merge it all and we get a little bit closer to that blue instead. So we just need to nudge it towards purple, I think, and then desaturate it a little. I think that's closer to your original reference, but big shapes. Some of these shapes are so nice. Just look at this shape you have here for this curl. It's coming down, and then it's coming out, and then on this side it's doing something like that. Like that is a really neat shape. And then this side it splits with that. Now, as I understand it, the way that they make League of Legends characters, and I would assume that extends to how they make these characters, but maybe there's a behind the scenes that you can go and watch, is with things called hair cards. So if here's our character, this is me, here's my big mustache, and my nose, and my big eyebrows, my tiny little eyes. So if you wanted to make hair cards for me, I think how they work is it's almost like literally sheets of paper that come out from a root, and they're layered, right? So you can make sheets of these different sheets, and those sheets are coming out, and already that looks kind of like hair, right? But then onto those sheets you can basically make whatever shape you want. So maybe this first sheet we make this shape, right? And then you have a 2D shape that's sort of warped in 3D space over a form, and it can cast a shadow, it can have thickness, and whatever else. So can you see how maybe the shapes on this are kind of like 2D pieces of paper that are cut into like hair shapes that are then it's warped over this form as it's going around. I think that's a neat way to think about it, to be honest. Whether or not that's how they do it. And again, I just think the shape is so it's just getting too complex, especially compared with some of these really cool shapes that you've got going on. So I think you could definitely just continue to simplify it a bit more. Right. Next, I will put this in feedback and I will respond. Who is next? Rogue Samurai is next, which is incredibly tricky for me to critique. I don't think Rogue Samurai is in the chat either. Are you in the YouTube chat, maybe? Am I quiet? people are saying I'm quiet. We'll get louder. Okay, so Rogue Samurai says, hi, I work mainly in physical mediums, pencil and pen. I've recently branched out to watercolor and dip pen and ink and would like medium-specific advice on top of any composition or color feedback. I don't use watercolor. I don't use watercolor at all. I think I've maybe done 2 watercolor paintings total in the last 8 years that I've been painting. So I'm not going to be able to help you on that. Though, as I understand it, one of the most important things to do with watercolor is retain a bit more of the white of your page. So, if you're using another kind of paint, like acrylic, well then you can go all the way down to something horribly muddy, like a dark value, and then you can go all the way back up to white just by painting on top, right? But with watercolor, if you go down to this value, unless you grab some acrylic paint or a different kind of paint, you are not getting back to white. It's not happening. You can't really work much lighter. So I think immediately you've got this sort of wash of stuff over the page, and you're preventing yourself from having a maximum range of contrast. You know, in this tiger's eyes, it might be really, really cool to have just a little bit of white or something to say that they're reflective, or you know, reserve some of that white for the teeth or the claws, or even just for some of the background. So be afraid of going dark too quick. I think other things that you're doing, it's not medium specific, but like a lot of these stripes are perfectly evenly distributed. I think that sort of flattens out your tiger a little bit. So that's how I think. In fact, let's just grab an orange and let's make a roughly tigery shape. Okay, so if I'm thinking about how my tiger stripes are going to go around this, I might think about putting down like individually some bigger ones. But do you see how the stripes are going to get closer in areas and further away in other areas, and then maybe there's a big gap here because we're seeing more of the side of the tiger. But then here, as the tiger's turning away from us, those stripes sort of condense together, right? Because I'm implying that it's receding in distance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like your character has a bridge.
I can hear my own voice from somewhere. Is someone in the Discord? Oh, I think you muted yourself. Okay, good. Right. Yeah, so actually varying up the placement of the stripes. Even this, I don't have a reference of a tiger. I've done this from my imagination. But this to me reads as being a bit more 3D than this. This feels like a sort of flat plane with a texture on the side of it. And this feels like stuff that's wrapping around a form. Other stuff, I think, let's see, medium specific advice. I don't think I have any. Composition advice, I'm imagining that this is a kind of Princess Mononoke style scene where the tiger is being consumed by an evil rot or something. So, but some of these strings aren't quite touching the ground. So if these are our feet of our tiger, here and here, and then we go back a little bit, and then we follow those feet back in perspective. Like if this is meant to attach to the ground, it has to go a lot further down. It has to go all the way down here for it to feel like it's pinning the tiger down, if that makes sense. So even though it's a very organic subject matter, like these things have to sort of be placed. Same thing here, like, well, the paw, I assume, is touching the ground, and so all this goop that's attached to the face is like hovering above the ground at the moment, which I assume is not what you want. feels like it should be attached. You know. The same thing goes for these lines of goop, by the way, as with the stripes. Is at the moment they are just very, very evenly spaced. So all of the distances between them are the same, which makes for something that isn't that interesting. So here's my tiger head over here, and let's imagine how we can do this. So it might be that there's one goop, and that goop is sort of separating, stringing out. Look at cobwebs maybe as a good example of this, right? Right, and then maybe another goop that's coming down here is thinner, just for that variety. And maybe there are two goops that come out of this spot. Maybe the next big goop comes further down out of those, right? And then, who knows, the next goop could be like really, really far away over here. In fact, I think that's too even. Maybe it's all the way back here. And in between those, there are still little bits of goop and stuff. But I'm trying to vary the distances between these things. So like this one and this one are quite close, and then there's a bigger gap before we get to the next one. And even these like individual ones, it's... do you know what? Everyone should have seen Dune, because that came out semi-recently. Do you know sand walking in Dune? Just think about that. Every time you paint, think about sand walking in Dune. So for those of you who haven't watched Dune or read Dune, they're in a desert. There's a giant worm that's going to eat them. This is the worm, Shai-Hulud. And in order to cross the desert safely, they have to like walk in a really weird pattern, because as soon as you walk normally, the worm sort of recognizes how rhythmic the patterns are, and it comes and eats you. So you have to walk and break up that rhythm by almost walking randomly. So some steps will be really long, and then there'll be little short steps, and then they'll sweep their feet around. This is how you should think about painting. Okay, so breaking up any kind of rhythm, unless it's deliberate, unless you're deliberately really trying to make something that has a repeated pattern or a repeated rhythm, you should try and break it up as much as you can. You should start sand walking. I'm going to make a YouTube video about how sand walking relates to painting, and it's going to be great. What an epiphany. I'm quite pleased with that. So, hello dazzling action. I'll put this in VC, and I will put it there. Next is this, titled Red Lucifer, which is a scary title. And you have said that you struggle with values on faces a lot, especially around the mouth area and the wings of the nose. I think you're doing fine. I think you're worrying more than you need to be. The values look alright to me. You're using heavy paint here, so I mean, maybe by virtue of the fact you're using heavy paint, some of the values are overcomplicated or higher contrast than they need to be. You know, can we join these two groups together? A lot of this information, can we just flatten it out a bit? Yeah, probably. But I think generally, you're doing a good job. Maybe you could emphasize more of the corner of the mouth. Like, how is this mouth actually joining to the fat in the cheeks? Well, that's something that we can think about. But, no, I think that's absolutely fine. I wouldn't worry about that at all. Same thing with the wings of the nose. Maybe we can talk about nostrils a little bit. Should we get up a reference of some nostrils. Is everyone ready for the yucky reference? Thank you, Shutterstock. So, what's going on here? Well, let's say that this is our general shape. Okay, so first of all, there are all sorts of fun muscly bits that are wrapping around the sort of crest of the nose up here. I don't know if crest is the right word. And they're doing all sorts of interesting things. You can kind of see where they meet here. And then they're joining up here, which is going down into the, is it the fulcrum? But the way that these nostrils are working is a lot of people will just draw them as holes, just bottomless pits. But really it's two pieces of skin folding over each other. So this part here is on top, so that when this comes around, this bit folds underneath, right? So it's actually folding in on itself. This bit's on top, and as it comes round, it's going in and folding in, which means, as you can see, as it starts to fold in, this part's going to get occluded and it's going to get darker. You might also notice that the edge here is going to be softer because it's kind of going inwards towards the center of the nostril. So looking at this, could we in fact say that A, the darkest shape should be here, but that B, we're actually seeing the inside of the nose go up into here, and actually this should sort of come on top. So it's one thing overlapping another thing, rather than just a flat hole or flat shape. Again, it's a heavy paint painting, so expecting you to zoom in that far and think about that, I don't really expect you to do that. I think you're doing a fine job as is. This decision here, you're not in the Discord and you're not in, maybe you are in the Discord now. I'm not sure what this decision is. I don't know if the character has two different coloured eyes. But this is in shadow. So I think what's going on is you've gone, well, here's one eye and then here's an eye in shadow, so we're not going to see as much information. But like this is also in shadow. So if this is in shadow and you've shown me that I can see like the eyelash, then I should be able to see the eyelash. There's no reason why it should be compressed over here and not over here. Like alternatively you could compress them in both, so I quite like it being compressed, but it just means over here, well, over here we compress it just as much, and we say that actually this area in shadow is flattened and we're not getting that information. I think that's fine. Maybe actually the edge between the eye and the iris is also flattened or simplified. Like that's something else you could do, but you got to make that conscious decision. Other little things like ears getting a bit redder. Actually, this is quite a deep hole inside your ear. Most of these holes are a bit... There are lots of funky little shadows and things that go on in the ear, which is really interesting. Feels like the lobe should come down more. Feels like there should be a shadow under the lobe. These eyebrows, maybe this model has perfect eyebrows like this, but generally I tend to find that the eyebrows are going to thin out the further towards the edge of the sort of the brow ridge they are. So they'll be darker towards the center of the face, and then less dark or less dense towards the back, but yeah. I will screenshot this, and I will put it in VC. Not VC, feedback. Can't speak today, apparently. Next is an armor study, which is exciting because it's Spoon June. Well, it's no longer Spoon June. Spoon June ended yesterday. I apologize for the lack of video this year, but oh well. And the question is some advice on simplifying or being more economical with brushstrokes and how to connect pieces of armor together. I think you're doing an okay job. I think simplifying brushstrokes is almost as simple as setting yourself that as a very deliberate challenge. So if I told you that I want you to take this breastplate and I wanted you to simplify it, how would you simplify it? I think you do it fine. So I'll show you how I might do it. So I might just grab the shape with, in fact no, I will paint the shape because I cannot use the lasso tool for the life of me. So the shape's going down here, up, up, and then up, and then down. Okay, let's fill it in. If anyone has any questions about any of this, by the way, even if you're not the person receiving feedback, feel free to ask. It might be that you have similar problems in your own work and you want an answer, but so now I've got my shape. I'm gonna flat fill it with something. I'm gonna sample your colors because I'm a thief. Like, what would be the simplest way for me to do this? I think it would be to go like that, and then like that. And maybe if we want to be really fancy, like that. And like that. So we're just placing in these big gradations. You've got like loads of little chalky brush strokes where you're building this up, which is great. It's good to build it up. I've just done it a bit simpler, so I'm thinking about the primary forms. I'm not getting the difference between this lighter area and this darker area. I could now do that, so if I make another layer, set to screen, and I just grab this, and then we just turn the screen down, make it a bit more colourful. Then maybe I can now maybe screen isn't ideal, but Should we try like overlay or something? Soft light, hard light. No, maybe screen is the best. Let's do screen, and then let's just... let's say that further down it has less of an effect with the eraser. Right. So, I feel as though I've put that together reasonably quickly. It hasn't taken me too much work, and then I could go back into this with something quite dark, and I could start defining actually what I think are some of these more important shadow shapes. But notice again that I'm staying really zoomed out with this. I'm sort of scribbling a bit more than I need to be, but that's an important little shadow shape. We could start defining some of these patterns down here. We could start saying that actually this down here gradates upwards. But it's building on that quite simple base to start with. You know, we've also got this shape down here. And maybe that should be darker. And then inside of that we've got... actually, I'll just use a scatter brush. Thank you, Megan. So I'll say there's all this stuff going on. But primarily I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. So just big relationships. The benefit of it being as simple as possible is that I feel that it makes it easier to rotate in space. So could I now grab this and say, actually, what does it look like from this angle? Let's see. So we've got that. And then again, we can just apply those same things that are going on. Maybe that's getting brighter towards this point. Then that's coming down here. Obviously, you take your time with it a bit more than I am now. But hopefully this is illustrating that if I can simplify it to something very basic, then I can sort of begin to move it about and conceptualize it a bit easier, rather than what you might be doing here, which is zooming in and sort of copying shape to shape what you're seeing. I'm thinking about this very much as a simple 3D form that's being lit and is reflecting light on different angles. Does that make sense to everyone? I don't know how to... how can I describe in better detail what I'm actually thinking about here? The main takeaway is that I'm seeing this as a 3D shape rather than a 2D sort of thing, but it's tricky to show that off. Yeah, so this bit is actually going to come out a little bit further. Maybe this picks up a bit of light. So, That's the main thing. Big relationships. The relationship that's affecting this piece of metal is also affecting this piece of metal pretty evenly. It's not like this metal is particularly more reflective than this darker oil treated metal. So I feel like we can treat them in the same group. You could use like a screen layer, or you could paint it all light and then use a multiply layer if you wanted to do it the opposite way around. That would seem to work as well. But yeah, less about like little individual brushstrokes and more about big brushstrokes. Apply this to Spoon June. Like, can we go? Here's my spoon. It's doing something like that. That's like a pretty big shape relationship that's going on. The underside of the spoon, let's say it's doing something like that, but maybe it's picking up the same light from the opposite direction. And then maybe it has a sort of hard reflective lip. And maybe that hard reflective lip gets darker in some areas and lighter in other areas. But these areas where it's going in and out of shadow and getting lighter and darker, they are big areas that I can tackle all at once with a big brush, rather than zooming in and treating them as these sort of micro reflections that are happening. They're big reflections. You know, there could be a super bright one in here, which would be kind of interesting. And maybe there'd be a bright reflection there as well. Okay. Put this in feedback.
Thanks, super helpful.
Thank you.
Just quick question. Like when I do these studies, I try not to use like blending layers and stuff. Like I might throw in curves as like an adjustment once or twice at the beginning stages. Should I like continue to try avoid using like heavily using blending layers, or kind of just naturally paint it?
It really depends on what your goal is with the study. So when you're saying that you're avoiding using blending layers, I'm assuming that means that the goal you have in mind is that you want to place every value by hand so that you understand more about the colors and values that you're putting down, right?
Okay, definitely.
Yeah, but you could also be approaching the study from a position of how well can I copy this using the available tools that I have, right? And that would be a very different way of approaching it. And maybe you'd use all the Photoshop tricks in the book to play around with blending modes and curves and whatever else. And it's not like one is better than the other. It just depends on what it is you're trying to get out of it.
Okay,
So
cool.
maybe do both. You know, maybe I've done so many studies at this point. I think I've tried everything. Maybe try one of these where you go, I'm going to paint it by hand. I'm going to place everything perfectly. And then try another one. See how many blending modes you can get away with using. Like, these are all super useful things. They're not something that you should avoid for too long. I think that actually learning how they work and learning how they work by using them in studies is going to be pretty helpful for you.
Okay, sweet. Thanks.
Right. Did I already? Yeah, I already did. Who's next? Next is our good friend, Spoonmaster. Here he is.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good.
You're saying that you struggle a lot with your shadows, soft edges, being too saturated or desaturated with your colors, and not being to use the color in the middle.
Oh, sorry, that maybe I didn't describe it too well. But two on the either end of being so saturated or not desaturated and not using the middle ranges. If that's what I'm trying to describe.
I think that these two images in particular don't require you to use colors in like a neutral range, if that's what you're talking about, because they are really monochromatic. Right, this is a green spoon. You don't need any neutrals. This is an orange spoon, or a copper or whatever. I like to treat neutral colors as transitionary colors. So, can we get a color wheel? Color wheel. So at the moment we're over here.
Yep.
If we wanted to go over here, like there was a really blue part of the spoon or something, that's when you'd start using those sort of greys and neutrals, because what you'd do is, instead of going around the side of the color wheel and going through all of these colors, you go right through the middle and out the other side. And so as you go right through the middle, let's do it. That's where you get these neutrals, right? You don't have to go through white. A lot of people sort of bend around, so you could go towards purple, and you could go darker as you go through the neutrals and out the other side. But the main idea is that you're desaturating something, but you're not just desaturating it for the sake of. You're desaturating it to transition to something else, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's no requirement for you to do that here. It wouldn't really make sense for you to grab this and go, oh, actually, I'm gonna put a neutral grey in there. I mean, you could if you wanted. If you just want to add in a little bit more, a few variation. Like, there's nothing stopping you doing that, right?
Yep.
But it's not on your reference. It's not something you have to do. That's just personal taste. You're going to use these neutrals as you're going from one thing to another, through a load of neutral stuff. And the nice thing is, as when you get into this sweet spot in the middle, this is where a lot of artists tend to play around the most. Because if I'm at the extremes and I put a blue next to an orange, like, there's loads of contrast, but all of a sudden, let's lower the contrast a little bit. All of a sudden, if I'm playing around in the neutrals and the greys, like, an orange and a blue look really, really nice together, you know.
Yeah.
And a green, they all just blend in so well, because they're right next to each other on the color wheel, right next to each other. And then maybe you have a bit of a stronger accent, like a red or something.
That's nice. Yeah.
But I just don't think it's applicable to these images at all.
Okay. Yeah.
What else were you saying? Shadows and soft edges.
Yeah. Sorry. Maybe they're not the best examples.
No, it's okay. This is not happening in the reference. So this outline you've got, which we're losing it more up here, right? Because we're not viewing it perfectly from the top down. I think we are viewing more of this side of the spoon, and so we're not going to see as much of this over here. And it's a really subtle thing that's like, we're seeing slightly less of that shadow there than we are there. But I think it's something worth thinking about.
No, that's a good point. I think I just kind of assumed
It's like a perfect top down here.
Yeah.
The rest of the shadows seem fine to me. Yeah, maybe the spoon, but I think this happened not last week, but the week before, didn't it? Is you're giving me these spoons, and as far as I can see, they're good spoons. They're nice spoons. I'm not seeing a lot of the problems that you're talking about. Maybe that's. Did we already speak about this? It feels like that is the thing for you to do. Is actually test this on something a bit more complex.
Yeah.
And then maybe more of these problems are going to be obvious, and the way that you can solve them is going to be more obvious, because there is a sort of a skill cap on how well you can paint a spoon. I think the idea is just that this is gonna propel you towards something a bit more ambitious.
Yeah. No, I tried an armor study. I need to do more, to be honest. I took a week off because of work, and this was kind of just me trying to get back into it again. So I wanted to do something not too complicated again. But yeah, I'll give a go of some more complicated references.
Yeah, I think it's just a neat idea to see what this is working towards, because they are better. These spoons, I think, are better than some of the other spoons. I hope you're doing that thing where you actually pick out these mistakes yourself and then correct them as you go.
Yep.
Yeah, because this is nice. I think your colours are. I don't think you need to worry about being too saturated. I think this is fine. Especially with something like metal. Metal's very reflective, keeps a lot of its saturation, which is nice. And I don't know how well this makes sense, because we're not using it with any kind of a case study at the moment.
No, that's very helpful. I always wondered how people like merged colors in a way. Mine were a bit like awkward or too contrasty, so yeah, this has helped me visualize that quite a lot.
Okay, good. Is there anything else in particular that you want feedback on?
No, that's kind of it. Sorry, I didn't have too much to go on here. But
No, it's fine. You're in the Patreon server, aren't you? So if you don't want to wait till these Monday sessions, just drop some more stuff in there, and I'll give you some paint overs.
Okay, sounds good. Yep.
Okay.
No, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next, we have a cultist concept, which is pretty cool. Okay. Now, if I'm looking at this as someone who has no idea what the design is, then I'm going to have some questions. And my main question is going to be, what is this? I'm thinking, is it like a cup to drink from? So it's like a cup or a chalice. Is it like a torch? It looks kind of like it could be set alight, like it's a sconce, a torch or a sconce. Is it just like an idol that they're holding up above their head? And it's not good that I have those questions. I think if this is for a game or a film, I should be able to look at it and that should be immediately obvious to me. So, like, I see that and I go, yeah, that's a bottle. Yeah, that's a doll. Yeah, this is a person. But this thing, which I seems to me like the most important part of the design, if anything, I just don't know what it is. So, clarity is good. In terms of the rest of the design, I really like whatever is going on here. This is like you're taking some of the shape design of like World War I and II gas masks, and then you're making it out of coconut fiber and straw and stuff. I think that's such a cool idea. So I really quite like that. Maybe some of these other bits could get a little bit more complex or high fidelity. So this mask, like, how exactly is this working? You've got this binding, which I imagine has bits of straw coming out of it, and then you've got all these other bits of straw. Right, and whoever's wearing this mask can breathe through these like filtered layers of this stuff. And then you've got eye socket holes. I don't know how uniform they are. Maybe they're not uniform at all. And then their hair is coming down over this, so we can't see under it. But maybe for the purpose of designing, we should just have a think about what's under it. You know, is this mask coming up? Is it strapped around the back of the head with some kind of other strap? Well, that would be useful to know. It seems like this is doing something, but I'm not quite sure. And this is, I feel like, more of where you're going to find the fun in a design, is actually how is this working, and how is it functioning, and how does that affect what it looks like. I find that to be the really entertaining stuff. So I want you to take that, and I want you to go, whoa, what's happening with this? What is this thing? Is it driftwood? Are these like an island people? If it is driftwood, is it one big piece of wood? Or is it multiple segments of wood? If it's multiple segments of wood, how are they tied together? Is it twine? Are they nailed together? If it is twine, is it twine? Maybe it's twine like just at the top, and so the rest of the parts sort of splay out a little bit as they go down. Or maybe it's more intricate and it's kind of like a shoelacy sort of pattern. Like, would that be interesting? Except for maybe these middle two are straight. You know, is it really haphazardly put together? Or do these tribal peoples have some sense of art, and so they're actually doing this very symmetrically? So, you know, this looks quite nice and neat compared with I think what you've originally gone with, which is a lot grubbier and poorly put together. But if it's a lot grubbier and poorly put together, then all of a sudden I'm looking at things like these bottles that look really well made, and I'm thinking, well, maybe they scavenge them or something else. But it's just about having that sort of unified idea of this world and how they're put together. How does this thing function? Because if you do come up with a really interesting way that this particular cultist tribe ties things together, oh, well, guess what? Haha, right. We can take that same way that they tie it together there, and we can apply it to the mask. We can apply that same stitching to this, right? And all of a sudden you're going to get this sort of much more unified design language, right? Where all of this stuff feels like it was made by the same people. So we've got straps going over the arms. What are the straps made of? Straw? Is it leather? When they're going around to the back, I mean, the fact that the arms are all the way up is really quite something, because that says that when the arms are relaxed, this whole front chest plate is going to sag down a load, surely. Which maybe it does, and then it covers the belly button. Yeah, I just get a little bit higher res with it. Draw out some of these props separately. I find that a lot of people tend to think about these kinds of drawings as like call outs on a final design sheet or a final breakout sheet, and I think it's so much more valuable to draw them as you go. Like, they shouldn't be like a cool thing that's in an art book somewhere where you go, here's what this looks like, I'm explaining it now. It's like, no, you need to explain it to yourself so that you know what you're designing, right? So you know what it looks like. And actually, I think by doing this, by being forced to consider this from multiple angles as you're designing, you're going to get something that's a lot cooler. Other things that personally I think you should bear in mind. Things like jewelry are a missed opportunity. So yeah, 2 little simple bands. They do a good job of actually indicating the direction that the arms are going in. But what does a wristband look like? What's it for? Is it decorational? Is it functional? If it is decorational, what does it represent within this world? And how does that affect the design? You know, maybe these wristbands also are tied into whatever else is going on because they're sort of fitted with straw that comes out from underneath or something. You know, what else is that going to do? Well, it's going to make 2 more pointy arrows, and those arrows are pointing towards whatever this person's holding. Feet. Always think about what characters wear on their feet. No one ever considers shoes until the very end. They're always an afterthought. Maybe their character is barefoot. I think that says something about the environment they're in. Have you seen some like tribal people in the Amazons who walk around barefoot because their feet are like they're insane. They're like splayed out pancake feet. They're really, really interesting. Probably more splayed out than that. I think the big toe comes off in one direction like that because they're walking around all day, every day on just barefoot in the rainforest, and so years and years and years of adapting to this have made something really interesting. Like your cultists could all have really freaky feet because they've been wandering around without shoes on. Would that be cool? I think that'd be cool. Or they could have invented some kind of footwear that adheres to the same design principles and patterns that you have going on elsewhere. I think you could get that to work. But pick one. You know, these things that are on the wrists, are they also on the ankles? Do they serve a different purpose? Are they purely decorational? I think that's something you could think about. But it's a cool design. I can see where you're going with it. It's very cool in a sort of Dark Souls-y way, right? It's eerie, it's creepy. I just think you need to think a little bit more about what exactly it is. So when you're doing this kind of work, the concept doesn't come after the visuals. The visuals, you are using the visuals to represent a concept or to represent a solution to a problem, right? And so figuring out what that problem is, and then figuring out how you're going to solve it, and then solving it visually, I think is probably a pretty reliable way to go. So the problem is, I need cultists for my game, which is set in this environment, at this time of the year. You know, this is how wet or humid it is or dry it is. What is the function of these? Are they enemies? Are they just creepy NPCs? Is it actually like a player character? Are you a weird little cultist? That could be cool. And how is that going to change the way you design them? Are you going to design them? Are they really, really primitive? What is the cult? You know, cults have pretty unique properties. They usually worship something in particular. The thing that they worship, could that be reflected in their design? You know, if these guys worship, maybe they worship like a giant boar god. You know, could they have like big boar feet, and then maybe that's the point of this mask, is to make it look more like a boar head. But another thing that might make it look more boary is if they have sort of a much more spiky back, you know, like they're big, hairy. Maybe another part of the boar tribe is that actually they are chunkier, like the creature that they're trying to represent. So, just have a think. Next, I've got to be running out of people here, surely. Oh, loon. Let's grab this. Chunk.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. So you've said you want it to be very dynamic, but you feel like it's
Yeah.
not as dynamic as you'd like it to be, and you think it's
Yeah.
kind of messy since it's underwater, and you want it to look like you just swooshed into the water and there are streams of bubbles.
Yeah, I tried simplifying them, but I don't think it looks very bubbly.
Yeah, I don't think it looks super bubbly. I've not painted many people underwater, so this will be interesting. What's the metal dog head? Is that like a shield?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a brass shield that has lycanthropy.
I think it's pretty dynamic. Is he meant to be fighting the octopus?
No, the octopus is his familiar.
Okay.
So I have both of them facing the camera as if they're like about to attack whoever's looking at the camera. Like a cool action scene, kinda.
I'm looking at images of bubbles.
Mhm.
I think the important thing with bubbles is that they go up and they pool on the surface. We can't see the surface. Maybe that would make it feel more dynamic. So let's imagine that actually up here we can see the top of the water that they've just jumped down into, and that way all of these bubbles can lead somewhere. But even then, maybe it can just get a little bit more blue. You find that water seems to compress a lot of colours. There's a really interesting video about colour and depth.
Mhm.
Let me find it. So, I assume I'm screen sharing my whole screen.
Yeah, I can see.
I am on Discord, but not on YouTube, but that's fine. But you can see that as these colours get even just 20 feet down, which isn't that far, everything is tending towards blue because it's the only visible light that makes it that far into the water. And then if you go all the way to the end of the video, and he's like miles down, you can see some colours resist it a bit better. Like pink does a pretty good job, but red just goes grey immediately. Red is completely lost, basically. So maybe we can think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I didn't want to like lose too many of the colors because I was scared that it'll look too samey.
I think I think it looking samey is something that you could. I think you could do really well.
I mean, yeah, I think I actually like how it looks, to be honest. I was just scared in the moment because I didn't want to mess it up.
That's fair. I think look at God, who is that other person? I'll have to find them. But you could do something like that. It's pretty funky. So everything's blue, but the dog shield is still quite yellow and bright. And maybe that same yellow, same orange is over here. And, you know, maybe the rings on the octopus get that bright. I hope you can't hear all the incessant Photoshop buzzing noises.
I'm used to it.
You know, but that's kind of interesting. Maybe another thing that would help the underwaterness of it is the flow of the character's hair. Like at the moment it's flowing down, but if he's just jumped in the water,
Yeah, it'll probably be going up.
yeah, it could be going up. Yeah, maybe a little bit.
I actually quite like that. That looks really nice.
But I think it's reasonably dynamic. I don't think there's a way to change how dynamic it is unless you redrew it.
Yeah.
So we could imagine that this is what's going on. I might be more tempted to go, here's the surface of the water up here. And actually here's our character, and there, I don't know, diving in. Here's the shield, and there's their foot, you know, something wacky, and the octopus is like over here, also diving down or whatever. But there's much more of like a sense that we're looking up at them, because
Yeah.
just thinking narratively, if we are the enemy and we are in the water and he's jumped into the water to attack us, then we're probably going to be below him, I would guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just try to find a pose that like showed off his shield, his sword, his octopus, and his like shoulder guard with the 2 stripes on it, because those were the important details that the person wanted in the drawing. And it was kind of hard for me to find a pose where everything is like nice and visible.
It seems pretty difficult. Let's try another couple. You know, or you could imagine that we're above the surface and he's like just jumped in and there's a big splash, you know. And you can still see the thing on his shoulder. I don't know where the octopus would go though. Maybe to his side or below him. You could also have it like really, really... Let's just get rid of this one. I could imagine this with a really, really symmetrical flat comp, where it's like, this is the surface of the water, and you can see all the bubbles coming off him as he jumps in. He's got his sword and his shield, and then you almost have like the big silhouette of the octopus behind him.
Oh yeah, that could be cool.
but it's a lot more sort of graphic and illustrative.
Hmm.
But there are loads of different directions you can take it. I think the direction you've taken it is fine. Maybe the one thing that I would suggest is that we just use value to push some of the octopus further back, like around his arm. I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
his arm is sort of getting a bit lost.
Yeah, I tried doing that around his like chest,
Yeah.
but I was scared to like cover up too much of the octopus's face, because it's like the second main character in the piece.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, is fighting with your client about it.
Yeah.
If it were my painting, I'd probably want to push the octopus back so he's just. I might even be tempted just to have the octopus be like a dark shape in the background, and onto that dark shape. Let's just grab this. You know, we have those two eyes or something.
Mhm.
And that's all we see, and the focus is on this character instead. But yeah, it depends on what your client wants.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next? We've got a study. Group all of this. So this is the study. You said you're uploading this piece you did recently for feedback. You were working off this image and you were going for a stylized and bright, unrealistic colour, but you feel like something's quite off. Maybe the lack of shading. How close were you trying to get to the reference?
I was really only going for inspiration.
Okay.
And then, yeah, like the outfit and position and everything then was taken from it.
That's fair. I think there are some really cool things going on that we don't quite get in your version, and that might be just because you weren't trying to get them. So one thing, were you here when we were talking about this?
Yeah.
So I think this is going on in your reference, where if we just have a look at it, like we're dancing around the greys here, and some of the greys are getting warmer, like this feels warm and pink to me, but it's not, it's just grey. And some of the greys are getting cooler, but they're all so close to each other that we're sort of going from warm to cool to warm to cool. Like this ear,
Yeah.
that's warm, but this part of the ear is cool. And then especially up in here in the hair, we actually get warm, so we're actually going towards a warmer side of the hue spectrum. And then the light is very cool by comparison. I think in your version, everything is very cool. So you've got blues and purples and pinks. The glasses are getting warm, which is a really nice, interesting contrast. But I think you're sort of losing the interplay amongst the greys there. Now, you did say you were going for unrealistic colours, but I wonder if there's a way to bring back in, still in an unrealistic way, some of those colour contrasts. So if we just get a brush and we lean this further towards grey. In fact, let's literally just get grey. Like, was it in here? I feel like we could just go around and get a few more of these warm greys to contrast all of these blues and things, and play around with them. Maybe we do it softly. You could even get any other sort of colour you want. You could get green. Put some green in there. Why not? The next thing I probably want to talk about is metal. Because a lot of the sort of metal-y stuff you've got going on doesn't quite feel metallic.
Mhm.
So if you look at how complex this little thing is, effectively every part of this is either this colour or this colour, and they're right next to each other, so it's quite high contrast.
Yep.
But your one is just one colour. So let's grab this and let's say, actually there's a big area of it that's getting darker, and then maybe we go even lighter if we're trying to push it. You know, and is that high contrast going to make that seem a little bit more metallic? I think so. Similar thing with the glasses here, like the whole rim of the glasses is light, which is fine if that's something you did by design, but maybe it would be more interesting to grab some of the rim of the glasses and actually push it quite dark to imply that they're metallic. And then you're only really going to get that super bright highlight in a couple of key areas. And that's going to make it feel like a 3D metallic shape. But we guess we don't have to go that dark. Put more of these saturated colours in. I think that would work too. Other than the material read and things, I think the main thing you need to concern yourself with is just the drawing of it. And by the drawing of it, I mean these glasses are a good example. So on your reference, we have a perspective. We're looking up at the person. We know that we're looking up at the person because we're seeing things like the inside of their nostrils. We're seeing a lot more of the underside of that top lip. Seeing a little bit of the underside of the jaw, and this ellipse is more or less flat. Now we're looking up at them, but these glasses, those are two very perfect ellipses, and they are in perspective. The front of the head. I think your glasses in comparison are sort of going in this funny angle, but then your nose is going that way, and your mouth's going that way. Right, so do you see how this line here doesn't line up with all the other lines? So all we have to do is move that down to match the nose, and all that means is that we have to grab these glasses and make them taller, basically. And that'll fix our perspective problem, which is nice. I think generally you've sort of straightened out a lot of the stuff that's happening, which again is fine. But I think that's one of the coolest parts about this reference is the idea that we've got this shoulder coming up into this neck, and then the whole face is sort of looking down, but we're also looking up at it at the same time. Whereas a lot of your lines, it's like maybe you've defaulted to having them pretty flat, which it sort of kills that sense that we're looking up at the character. Now, if you don't want it to be like you're looking up at the character, that's fine. But that's something that I think would be really interesting, and maybe something that would push you a bit, you know, when you're painting. It'd be a good challenge for you, because it seems like you're pretty comfortable painting it from this angle currently. What else have we got? Let's have a look at the values of it. The values seem fine. Just have a look at this here compared with this. So on the reference, we've got like a color for the material underneath, and then all of this fancy fabric stuff is just a lighter layer on top, the beading, I guess. Whereas on yours, it's like you've got the color underneath, and then you've got the lighter fancy beading stuff, and then you've actually got a darker color underneath some of your beading, and maybe that's just making it a little bit more complicated than it has to be. You know, if we want the viewer to look up here at the face, maybe we can just simplify this. So if we go lighter, and then we put a big shadow on it, and then we just do exactly what they've done there. So we get all these fun patterns, but they're not getting any lighter than they're not getting any darker than the thing that they're on. Right, and the patterns can follow the form, and you could spend easily half an hour just figuring out what these patterns look like. As the patterns go into shadow, they're getting more blue, picking up more of the light that's above them. Or whatever. So I just feel like some parts could be simpler, so that they're not taking away as much of the attention when you might want them to look up here at the face. Another little drawing area that you might want to look at is this necklace bit. So it's a uniform thickness as it goes around. It does get a little bit thinner as it recedes in distance away from us in perspective, right? So as it goes towards here, it's getting a little bit thinner, but not by much. And then it's sort of coming over and going back round the other way. Yours, I think, is a little bit low, so you're giving her a lot more neck room than she does here, which makes this feel less like a sort of neck piece and more like a collar on the dress shirt itself. So maybe you could push it up a little bit further and have it follow that form of the neck to make the neck feel nice and 3D, right? So and obviously that can have all the information and whatever else in that you want. Yeah. Is there anything else in particular that you think I'm missing that you'd like feedback on?
I do want to ask just about the background. I didn't want to draw the background, but I didn't know exactly how to how to face it. Do you have any suggestion?
Yeah, so I think the background, in terms of the reference, again relates back to this idea that we're looking up at the model. And so you're seeing, again, the underside of a lot of this architecture, and the vertical lines are receding to a point. Do you know about 3-point perspective and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're all receding to like a third point up there. But you've compressed the perspective on yours. Your horizon line is probably eye level. And then I would, if you are going to suggest that there are things in the background, because you've flattened out the perspective on the face, you would also flatten out the perspective of whatever's in the background. I don't mind how you've done it. I think it's pretty nice to just leave it sort of abstract, unless you want to commit to actually painting a building, which is a big thing to commit to, you know.
Mm.
So I think abstract shape is fine. Maybe to contrast how sort of organic and flowy the rest of the portrait is, you could have the background be a bit more geometric, whereas before I think you have the background be just as flowy as the character, which maybe doesn't provide as much visual interest, but that's sort of very subjective, isn't it? So just remember that whatever perspective rules you've applied to the face, you can all apply to everything else. That's the main takeaway in terms of the background, but
Thanks.
you could contrast temperature, so the face is very cool. Maybe your background gets a little bit warmer in comparison. Don't know. Could be interesting. Or you could go even more crazy with it. I think backgrounds, especially if you plan on sort of abstracting them, you can almost do whatever you want with them. Go crazy, play around with different things. Okay, I'll put this in the feedback channel. Mr. Baggins, Mr. Baggins.
Yeah, hello.
In regards to the spoon, although I said to ambient phantom applies. For the other, you worry about how to implement good shapes in a painting. That's a difficult one, isn't it? Good shapes in a painting. I think the core of what you need to remember, I have mentioned in a couple of these critique sessions. I don't know how many you've watched or anything, so I'll go over it again. Is that drawing, I think, can be split into two sections, which are optical and conceptual. Optical you could think of as sight, and conceptual as feel, or you could think of these as 2D and 3D. So generally we make a series of 2D shapes on a page, but they represent something 3D, like a 3D form, so these tie in together. Now you can push those shapes pretty far if you just think about things like big, medium, small, you know, the spacing of your shapes, that kind of a thing. But it would still be nice if they related to a 3D form that feels 3D. You're doing a pretty good job of this already, I think. Is there anything in particular with the shapes that you feel like you're struggling with?
What bothers me the most is when you look at it from afar, the hat seems very as it doesn't belong to the head.
Okay.
It just doesn't fit in.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the hat needs to be lower down. One thing you've got here is you've got this cast shadow, or I guess it's more of an occlusion shadow that's coming out from under the brim of the hat. But if we go back to where it looks like it's coming from, it looks like it's coming from all the way up here. And I don't think anyone wears a hat on their head like that. So let's imagine here's our Goblin Man, and I'll do my best to there he is, right. Okay, I think you're putting the rim of the hat like up here on his head, and then it's coming down to about there. But when you wear like a cap, I tend to find that the cap is coming a lot further down. It's almost sitting on the brow ridge, if you think about like a bandana or something. And so maybe we can still see the underside of the hat, but we should see more of the underside of the hat.
Hmm.
and then there should be less of that big shadow. All the shadows should be even. Because I feel like it's saying that the brim of the hat is higher up. You could also take this idea with the silhouette of the hat itself, and so if we bring the, you know, where this notch here where the hat goes in, well, that's telling us where it's attaching to the head. So if you want it further down, it could go down like that. And maybe it does sit higher on the back of the head than on the front of the head.
Hmm.
I think we could just play around with maybe more of the personification of this dude and his hat. So he looks quite sad.
Personification.
Yeah, like the mood or the character or the personality. He looks quite sad. Should his hat reflect that? You know, it kind of already is, but can we just push those shapes a little bit more? Maybe the back of the hat completely flops down. Like this. Boonk. You know, does the front droop down even more? Like it's a very sad hat. Because he looks like a very sad wizard. I don't know if you intended him to look so sad.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah. Maybe the back of the hat really slopes back. You know, so you can push those shapes a lot more, stylize them a lot more, and then can his beard and mustache do the same thing? So maybe his nose is fine, but I don't know. Maybe his nose could also droop down a little bit. And then maybe his beard. People say that I look very sad a lot of the time because my mustache sort of does this, where it droops down at the side, and then his beard at the moment is flicking back up, but should it? Maybe his beard should just go down, curl in on itself, I don't know. But those shapes aren't super resolved at the moment. Let's just copy. So the hat can reflect his personality. Doesn't have to do it exactly like this, but think about the shoulders. Again, he's sad. But his shoulders just gonna slope down like that. Like he's just failed wizard school. He's been thrown out. What if the hat doesn't slope backwards? What if the hat slopes forwards? You know, that's kind of interesting. Looks a little bit silly, but
Yeah, I get what you mean.
yeah, or like it doesn't have to slope forwards or backwards. Maybe it just slopes to the side, you know, over his face. And that's the opposite of. The opposite of if he's like a really, really energetic wizard and his hat is going. And it's really, really spiky. And his His eyes are wide open. And his eyebrows are... Maybe he's got a big grin on his face, and his mustache is going crazy, and his beard's really spiky, right?
This might be a stupid question, but how do you know how much you can push something while it still seems reasonable?
Have you ever played around with like an elastic band?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to turn off the Minecraft soundtrack. So the idea with an elastic band is that if you pull it and you pull it and you pull it and you pull it, eventually it's gonna break, and we don't want that. But if you know when it breaks, so you could say, ooh, the elastic band can stretch that much, and if it just stretches 1 millimeter more, it's gonna break. Well, then that's fine. We can just go back in like a couple of millimeters. Right, so because Photoshop or whatever digital program you're using is digital, and you have the benefit of you can save multiple versions, you can go back on yourself, you can undo things, nothing's permanent, then yeah, you're right, there is a chance that you can go too far, and what I recommend you do is exactly that. You should go too far and see exactly where too far is, because maybe, I mean, I don't use like crazy shapes really when I paint, but maybe this is too far. Maybe this isn't far enough. Maybe we could go like, you know, crazy. This guy's got like the biggest hat you've ever seen, and it's just like a crazy pointy shape. Like, that's quite fun. So it's your job to find out where the too far mark is. And then when you find out what too far is, you can go, okay, that's too crazy. I'll just bring it back a little bit to something a bit more reasonable, right? So I wouldn't be afraid of going too far. I'd almost treat that as like the test, is how far can I go? And you've got to find that out, and that's part of the fun of it, right? Is really push these things, because there's some artists that go absolutely insane with their shapes, and they can really get away with it. One big part of that is you can get away with whatever shape you like as long as you do it confidently enough. Like, I can have a really crazy beard like that if I want, as long as I just commit to it. You know, if you did this same beard but you did it really nervously, and you were like, oh well, maybe he can have a beard that's a little bit spiky, but you're sort of not sure about yourself, then it begins to look a bit bad. But if you say, no, his beard is one big swooping shape, and you just do it, and it's a really confident, bold decision, then no one will question it at all. So that's part of the fun of going a bit too far. Boo. Sad wizard. But yeah, I think the main thing with your shapes is that you can, you're using shapes to tell a specific form, but I think you're doing that fine. Like, everything seems as though it's more or less in perspective. Things feel pretty 3D. The rim of the hat was the main problem. But then the second thing is, once you've stopped worrying about how 3D your shapes are, because you begin to do that sort of intuitively, then you can worry about, well, narratively, what are my shapes doing? How are they reinforcing the story or the mood? If the story of this is sad wizard, then every little shape should tell me that he's a sad wizard. Whereas here, he's a normal wizard that just looks sad. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I would think about. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone left? We must be near the end now. I think that was it. I think that was the end. Excellent work, team. Right. Okay. I'm probably going to delete the YouTube VOD because for the first half an hour I was muted. Not muted, I just didn't have the screen share going. But that's okay. Thank you for attending, and